The number one way we as people are meant to deal with our hurts and our pains and our struggles is that we're supposed to talk, to communicate. That's what makes you and I as people different than most every other living thing on this planet, is our ability to communicate at a high, sophisticated level, our ability to process feelings and emotions. And when we don't walk into that space and we suppress the social and the emotional aspect of who we are, that pressure begins to build and it won't go away. It will find dangerous and destructive ways out. And in today's situation, when we add the technological piece, this extra pressure of what social media does add, yes, I believe there's a place and a space for that stuff to be connected. But what's happening is we find ourselves comparing ourselves to everybody, and we have these picture perfect images, and we don't seem like we measure up. So we suppress our real feelings and our pains. And the problem is, even though most of us know we should talk about our issues and that we need to talk about our issues and we should talk about our issues, we don't, because I don't know what you will do with it. And so I mask it and I suppress it. And the pressure busts pipes. How do I know? Well, my parents got divorced. I was a great straight A student, thriving, good in sports, a great personality. But behind the mask, there was a lot of pain. And I went from middle school to high school as I started comparing myself to what society says I was supposed to look like. High school, it's a time of development, and we as students, even though a lot of times we act like we don't care, peer pressure is a real thing. We care so much what people think about us. Adults, we kind of do the same thing. We act like we don't, but many of us as adults, we care about the opinions of others. That's why a lot of times we hide some of our marital issues. We hide some of our defects and our flaws. We hide some of our insecurities, because even as adults, we have a hard time being vulnerable. And for me as a student, as I was growing up in these times when I wasn't operating the number one tool of my ability to decompress my hurts and my pains, which was talking and communicating, the pressure builds. And for me in high school, there was times that I would isolate myself and the whispers would get louder. Thoughts of giving up, you're alone. Thoughts of, why don't you just quit? Nobody cares about you. And I wouldn't speak up because, again, I was so scared to communicate those issues. And in high school, I battled suicidal ideologies. In high school, I battled suicidal thoughts. And in high school, at the age of 18, I climbed the ladder, and there was a point in my life when I tried to take my life. See, the pressure behind the mask, one way that it will find its way out is thoughts of ending it. And we see others on TV or on the news or in the media making these choices. And so we begin to think that maybe I should too. Communication is the number one defense of not isolating where the whispers get louder. But a lot of us, we've lost our voice because we don't think that we can, or we don't know how, or what will others think about us, so we don't. Some of us, we deal with the pressure in a different way. For me, besides having thoughts of giving up, I remember there was times that I would have these anger, these hurts, these frustrations, and I couldn't control these, and I didn't know how to deal with these, and I couldn't handle these feelings. So when I felt this way, I remember there was a time that I could inflict pain and harm and injure myself, because I can control this. And you know, every school that I go to across the country, I ask students these questions. I ask the students, how many of you in this school, how many of you in this community, how many of you in this school year have you heard a classmate, have you heard a friend, have you heard somebody, not you, but somebody you know, talking about or entertaining the idea of maybe having choices to end their life, to making that forever decision, and hands by the waves get raised. I ask students, how many of you do you know somebody? Have you heard somebody? Have you seen somebody dealing with their hurts or their pains with self-injury and self-harm? And hands by the waves, no matter what city, no matter what state, no matter what country I am, hands get raised. I could even show you and prove it to you here now, adults. How many of my students in this room this school year, have you heard a classmate, have you heard a peer in your community talking about or entertaining the idea of giving up on life? Would you raise your hands, please? And in every school that I go to, I ask these questions. And when I begin to inspire students to know, because every hand that gets raised, that represents a silent struggler, that represents somebody, that hand that's raised, it represents a proxy of a heartbeat of somebody who's crying out. And when I tell the student body or the community events or wherever I'm at, I try to inspire young and old alike to understand something. Feelings are complex and complicated and difficult to deal with, and feelings can cause us to make decisions and be impulsive that aren't based in facts. Just because you feel alone, it doesn't mean you're really alone. And just because you feel isolated and you feel like nobody understands you, it doesn't mean that you really are isolated and nobody understands you. And I always ask the school body or the community event, I always say, listen, your hands will represent a beacon of hope. I'm asking you the question about you now, a general arching question. But how many of you in here, in your own story, and I inspire the students to own this question because their hand will represent a beacon of hope to prove to our silent strugglers that they're not alone. I get passionate. And I always ask the students, how many of you in your story, and I'll ask it tonight even to the young and the old in here, how many of you in your own personal journey, in your own personal story, have there been times in your life on a general question, you personally as a young man, a young lady, an old man, an old lady, a person in general, I'm not calling any of you old, but how many of you in your own journey have you felt alone, by yourself, or like nobody understands you? Would you raise your hand tonight? And see, everywhere I go, so many of us raise our hands because growing up and dealing with emotions and feelings, it is complicated. No matter who we are. And what I do when I ask that question, we've literally had thousands of students say, when I saw all those hands get raised, it helped me understand that I'm not alone. And I show the students or the adults or anybody in that venue, you see the hands raised by default, by people feeling alone. It lets you know that even though you feel alone, it doesn't mean you're really alone because people feel just like you. But we won't know that because sometimes we isolate and we protect and we don't communicate. You see, I dealt with all of these issues, as well as having thoughts of giving up, as well as dealing with self-injury and self-harm. I have scars on my hands. I've also recognized, and we all know it, we can use the word bullying. I like to call it for what it really is. It's verbal, mental, emotional abuse, and ultimately what it is, there are people that wear the mask and they suppress their hurts and their pains, and instead of having thoughts of giving up, instead of dealing with self-injury and self-harm, some of us, we cope different with the hurts and the suppressions. We look in the mirror and we want to belong. There's nothing wrong with that. But we've learned to come to school and we've learned to go to our workforce and we've learned to deal with people this way. We try to take our worth and take our value and step on people and hide behind our words and hide behind our fists because hurting people hurt people.